Hello, ladies and gentlemen. This is Mark Powls with Verity Seeker. And I recently had an interview with Democrat candidate Roger Sims. He's running for House Representative District 5 here in Kansas. And it was a very good interview. I'm happy that Roger agreed to do this interview. I think it's important that candidates, all candidates, regardless of party, are able to get their message out, because the voter may find out that regardless of party, you might align with some of the things that these people have to say. The incumbent is Republican Mark Samsel, and he will be up against Roger Sims in the general election on November 3rd. And by the way, I want to encourage everyone to vote. This year's election is very important. The interview that Roger and I did was pre-recorded, and I think you're going to enjoy hearing what he has to say. I'm not advocating everything that Roger, I'm not advocating all of his positions. I basically asked the questions, and he answered from his heart. I don't believe he was blowing smoke in the voters' face. I think he was telling it exactly the way he sees it, and I respect that in Roger, and I appreciate very much that he did this interview. So without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and turn this over to the interview with Democrat candidate for House Representative District 5, Roger Sims. I thought it'd be a good idea to have Roger come on the show and let you know who he is. So how you doing today?
Very good. Thank you. Thank you for inviting me to do this.
You bet. My pleasure. Well, okay, there's a lot of people in my area, Anderson County, that, they asked me, okay, who's running against Mark Samsel? And I said, well, it's Roger Sims. And they asked me, do you know anything about Roger? Well, I know more now, which I'm glad I do. It's great to have talked to you a little bit. But, can you tell the voter out there a little bit about yourself, your family, what you've done in the past? Give them an idea who Roger Sims is.
Sure. Well, I've lived on a farm north of Parker for about 42 years with my wife, Charlene. We recently celebrated our 50th wedding anniversary, so I'm pretty high on the commitment thing. My background, I kind of became interested in politics when I was working I was living in Parker and commuting to Kansas City and working for a neighborhood housing organization that went in and not only trained unemployed people to do construction work, but also fixed up houses. And so after that, I've owned my own construction company, and that's how they hired me in the first place. But after that, I actually I went back to, I'd gone to KU and left, and I actually went back to school and finished up a degree at the ripe old age of 40 years old. And I got a journalism and English degrees both, and began working for Miami County Republic newspaper. And then also started working, doing some work for Advanced Publishing, which publishes, among other titles, the Packer, Drover's Journal, which many of cattlemen are familiar with, and Pork Magazine. And then I began sort of a combination of being on staff and working freelance. I was editor of the Lewisburg Herald paper and a Lynn County editor for the Osawatomie Graphic. So fairly deep in journalism, spent a good 15 years working in that. And then I was hired to teach journalism and English at Prairie View High School. And I taught there for 3 years and then moved on to West Franklin High School up by Pomona and taught there as well. And then retired from teaching after being in the classroom for 9 years. But in addition to that, I was actually before that, and while I was probably beginning in the 1980s, I was actually elected to the Prairie View School Board, and I served on that for a total of 5 terms, 20 years. It was not, they were, some of the terms were non-consecutive, but so I was able to get a really good insight into government finance, school finance, what goes on in terms of what happens in the school and the classroom. I think I have an outstanding background in that, and so that's kind of, right now my wife and I operate, since I retired from education, my wife and I operate a bed and breakfast out of our home.
Wow.
And so that's kind of kept me busy. And then obviously the campaign has been a real force for the last couple months. So.
Yeah. Yeah. Why? This is off the cuff question. Why would anybody want to put themselves through this?
Well, I think that's a good question. And I've avoided doing it for several years, but I thought this year, I thought I should step up and go ahead and run. I think I've been kind of concerned about some of the antics that have happened in the legislature, and I thought that I would, step up and run and at least put ourselves out there. Obviously, the number of Democrats versus the number of Republicans in the 5th district is pretty uneven. A lot of mostly Republicans, but I think I think that what has happened is that the Democrats have kind of tended to shy away and say, no, it's, we can't win there, and I think. My hope is that whether I win or lose, that we make a good enough showing to say, so the next generation comes along and says, I think we can make a difference in Anderson, Miami, and Franklin counties.
Okay, very good. In the 4th Declaration of our Bill of Rights, it basically mirrors the federal government's 2nd Amendment, which, is the right to keep and bear arms. And I'm going to go ahead and read that for the voter, and then just give me your take on this. A person has the right to keep and bear arms for the defense of self, family, home, and state, for lawful hunting and recreational use, and for any other lawful purpose. But standing armies in time of peace are dangerous to liberty and shall not be tolerated. And the military shall be under strict subordination to the civil power. What is your position on what is our 4th Amendment? Basically, it'd be the 2nd Amendment in the U.S. general government. What's your take on that?
Well, I think it's first of all, I think it's much clearer than the 2nd Amendment. We've relied on court interpretation and even Scalia, when he wrote the opinion of the court, said, there are just opening up, for owning any kind of firearm is can be a dangerous thing, and he cautioned about that. But I think that this particular Bill of Rights in the Kansas Constitution is right on. I think that we can't allow standing armies, meaning I'm going to say paramilitias, to form, and I think that's very dangerous. We saw what happened in Michigan when a paramilitia essentially rushed the state house, going past the guards armed with military-style rifles, and so I think that sets a dangerous precedent, and I think that we should. In terms of any kind of legislation, we should keep this one in mind. Obviously, the National Guard comes under the subordination to civil power, and the men and women who volunteer for the National Guard are in my view every much as a hero as someone who joins any of the other armed forces, and they're called out for all kinds of things: natural disasters, fighting fires, quelling riots, and they have to be prepared for anything. And I think they do a great service to the state.
Okay. Now, number two, the second question here jumps right to the abortion issue. Here in Kansas, the pro-life movement is it's a strong movement. We have people that run on the pro-life movement. What is how do you feel about pro-life, abortion, and this? Is it a state issue? Is it a federal issue? What's your take on that?
Well, I in terms of, I think that a lot of people just feel like a Democrat's automatically going to be pro-abortion, and that's not the case. I actually don't know anybody who favors an abortion. Abortions are sort of the result of failures along the line, whether it's teaching about birth control, or it's preventing rapes, or whatever. It's obviously it's a failure, and it's just a bad situation. And so, however, by the same time, I don't favor passing an amendment to the state constitution that would ban it. And the reason is because because of rape and incest, and there's instances where the woman has no control over what's happened. And I think not only rape and incest, but there are times when perhaps a situation has gotten out of hand. A woman has been in a situation where she's been abused, but she doesn't want to go through the humiliation of pressing charges against the man, because that usually, that causes the whole public spectacle. I think the other thing is the anti-abortion people tend to dwell on late-term abortions, and those are very rare in the state. I was looking here in 2018, there were only 5 occurred when the term was at 22 weeks or longer. And so I think even most we have this image of well, a doctor's going to perform abortion a week before the baby's born, and that's simply a lie. Most doctors won't do that. Their job is to protect life, and we see by the amount of care that goes into babies that are born before term, whether it's they have to be taken, or they have to, or they just they're just born naturally. Is that I saw a program the other day where a young man was born at probably not even 30 weeks old and managed through. So I think I think that obviously there are times when the fetus is no longer viable, but even if the woman's life is in danger, if it is viable, we can save that baby. So I am more of the opinion that we should work to make abortions unnecessary rather than make them illegal. The other thing about that, if we make them illegal, basically that industry goes underground. And in the times before Roe v. Wade, we have no idea how many abortions were performed, but we do probably can get an idea of how many women died or were rendered sterile or had serious infections because of botched abortions. And it's better that it's done in a safe method. Most abortions now are done with pharmaceuticals, and rather than doing procedures. I think I think that probably once again, I think that we'd be better working on some of the causes. Why do women, why do they feel trapped? And I know several of my students, when I was teaching school, the girls, whereas when I was a student, when I was young, it was like, well, I don't want to, oh, I was so afraid that my parents would find out. It seems now that parents are more accepting that their daughter has gotten pregnant, and people who have said, who they were totally behind their to go ahead and have the child and raise it. So I think a lot of things have changed. In a way, I feel that Republicans sometimes, instead of working to find a solution to these problems, they use it to divide it and to have have people vote against their own best interest, simply based on the abortion issue.
Okay.
Oh, let me go. One other thing I need to add to that is that also, whether it's a federal or state, I think one of the problems is, if we could compare that, and I don't like to say a freedom to have abortion, but the ability to have abortion. Let's look at that in terms of like, for example, the Civil Rights Act. If states were allowed to do their own Civil Rights Act, where would states like Mississippi be now? They probably would not have passed something like that. So I think in terms of the freedoms, I think that that the federal government, those are kind of the freedoms we all look toward, and I think that it still should be, at least the basic freedom should be under the U.S. jurisdiction.
Okay. Very good. Let's go on to number 3. Just like now we're going to talk about your opponent. Just like your Republican opponent, Mark Samsel, you've taken a strong position towards, funding our public schools. I know he supports that as well, but do you believe our public schools are underfunded, even though, from what I can tell, isn't there an increase every single year?
Well,
what's your position?
First of all, I think that we're at this point, we're back up to about where we should be in terms of funding, and I think that thanks to the efforts of Governor Kelly and moderate Democrats and moderate Republicans, we've kind of answered that for now. However, during the Brownback administration, we had a fairly severe cut, and this is in state funding, not necessarily local funding, and several of the smaller schools were hit very hard. I know when I was teaching at West Franklin, we didn't have a very large staff, but they had to let go 35 teachers and paras and support staff because of those cuts. And so what they did is they cut taxes from income taxes from companies, and some of them international organizations. And then okay, well, now we don't have enough money for education. I know that one school district in particular, Jayhawk Lynn in Mound City, was faced with a $250,000 cut in January. How do you make that up in mid-year like that? And so, I think it's important. The other thing that obviously administrations and teachers alike are really under a lot of stress this year because of the COVID crisis. And fortunately, education now is done on you don't necessarily go on the enrollment of that particular year. You kind of spread it out so that any kind of decreases are sort of absorbed by large attendance years. But with a lot of people going to homeschooling, or because of the COVID, I think we're going to see, and plus the added expenses that schools are having to do to make sure that classrooms are safe and sanitized and that sort of thing. I think we really need to protect that funding, because in the long term, in 10 years, when COVID is history, we'll still have the kids who were affected by any kind of decrease that we had to cut classes or services because of COVID. So we need to make sure that funding stays in place.
Okay. Onward to the next one. If you, as a legislator, had an opportunity we're dealing with schools again, to reform our public schools, what would you reform? Would you reform anything, and would it cost the taxpayer more or less?
Well, the State Board of Education has most of the sway about what happens in the classroom. Legislature can make suggestions, but ultimately it's the decision. Most of the decisions about curriculum. One of the things that I would like to see is more project-based education in the high schools. Basically, what I see a lot of times is we have juniors and seniors, and we may teach them government, but do they retain it? And the year after they've been out a year, not really. And I know I've seen graduates say, "I wish I knew about personal finance when I learned about that in school," and the teacher responds, "We taught it, you just weren't there," and so. But I think that one of the things that we can do is make. I tried to do, even though I was teaching English and journalism, I tried to do more projects in the classroom, long-term projects, starting, and it can be things working through a paper type project, doing research on things, but it also could be things like building something. I know a lot of high schools now have home construction. The houses aren't very big, but they're making buildings and wiring them and teaching the kids basics. Prairie View, for example, sends kids up to Paola to learn how to weld. And so I think that a lot of those things, a lot of those programs we can look at. It would also be good to get some of the community college programs or technical schools involved and helping set up those courses, and maybe even coming in and doing, we do dual college credit for college courses. Why can't we do dual credit for technical courses as well? And I think that would speak to a lot of the young men and women in the 5th district who are not necessarily interested in going on to the university, but really are, but want to do, but interested in training. Because what we're finding now is that most occupations require extra training, and the only way to get that is then to go on to a community college or technical school. I think the other thing that I would like to see is a course on being a consumer of the media. Much has changed since you and I were in school. Actually, probably since we even taught school, and that the internet has become the sort of the media of choice, and we need to teach kids how to separate the good information from the bad information, and how to look to do that. I mean, we said that a lot of times, and adults on both political stripes, liberal or conservative, is they're quick to latch on to things that may or may not be correct because it basically supports their view. And it's I know it's hard to wade through that sometimes. So I think as either as a thread through the curriculum, or as actually maybe a course, is to teach kids how to judge what's worth keeping and what's not.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, very good. My understanding is that your opponent, Mark Samsel, supports Medicaid expansion, and you know, I think you also support that. What's your take on that?
Yeah, that's correct. The uh, yeah, I think the Medicaid expansion is all. There were enough votes in the legislature this last full session to pass that. Um, and it was simply because of the leadership in the House decided to hold that bill hostage over the abortion issue, that it didn't pass the legislature. Kansas has given up literally billions of dollars in federal money that would help ensure low-income Kansans. And I know a lot of times Republican candidates say, "Well, these are just bums who don't want to work and want free insurance." The reality is much different from that. It's for people who aren't old enough to get Medicare, but they're disabled, or they can't work, or they have an illness. Both men and women, and this would help them get decent medical care for them. The same is true with perhaps the young single mother who has kids and is working because she doesn't have much training, is working a low wage job and can't get any kind of insurance. The other thing in that respect, so what happens if these people don't get adequate medical care? Well, when it gets bad enough, they show up in hospital emergency rooms. Hospitals cannot turn them away, and so they are treated there, and they likely don't have the ability to pay. So the hospitals write it off, but that doesn't really happen. Hospitals can't operate in the red, so they have to pass and the cost of those unpaid bills along. And so those of us who have insurance, we end up indirectly picking up that tab. I think the other thing that one of the things that a lot of people who are against this say, well, the federal government pays 90% and the state pays 10%, but we can't afford that. The problem with that is that actually by coming to community, by offering this basic insurance to low income people, a lot of communities can hire more healthcare workers, and most of that. So it's more jobs. It helps keep our rural hospitals solvent. They are better able to operate and serve the communities. We had. It's not a fix-all for rural hospitals, but for example, when Fort Scott lost their hospital a couple of years ago, having Medicaid expansion would definitely help. But the other thing is, I guess one other thing that I would point out on that is by pumping that much into the Kansas economy and having that many jobs, basically our income tax rate is 5%. So most of that $1 billion that would have come through the Kansas economy would have been recouped for our portion by income tax increases and added revenue. So to my way of thinking, it's a win-win situation. I believe that most of the Republicans who are against it are still trying to fight back Obamacare, and they see this as a large government. I see it as a necessary government.
Okay, I'm going to jump over to voting, and this is a basic question for Kansas. I know it's come up before. Should we require IDs for voting?
Well, we use driver's licenses just to make sure you're the person. I don't think that we're seeing Chris Kobach spent 4 years as Secretary of State trying to prove that we had a lot of voter fraud, and basically he came back with less than a dozen cases. And so I think, I think if you require more than that, you start getting into voter suppression. And I know that we had a friend who was in assisted living, and she wanted to vote for me this year. Anyway, she was worried because her driver's license was out of date, and we talked to the county clerk, and she said, it's okay, we will, you can vote. But I think generally, unless we have some kind of demonstrable voter fraud, that I think the driver's license works just fine.
Okay, we're going back in time. I'm on number 7 here. The 7th question deals with the Emergency Powers Act here in the state of Kansas. If you were a state legislator in 2020 and you were in session, would you have done the same thing that our legislators did? They basically turned all of their legislative power, basically turned authority over to the governor, the executive branch. Some believe that, the pandemic didn't quite reach the disastrous level, that's required for that. What would you have done? Would you have changed anything?
Well, first of all, it's kind of complicated because most of the legislatures headed home.
Yeah.
And I mean, so here's the problem. We're watching national news. We're seeing reports of basically almost a medieval situation in Italy, where people are being loaded onto dead carts in the street, and we're seeing New York cases rise. And sort of out of an abundance of caution, the governor stepped up and said, this is a health emergency. Better safe than sorry. And I think based on that, I mean, none of us knew. We didn't have a good idea about how COVID-19 spread. We didn't know. Basically all we saw is things on the national news. And at the same time, we had a White House that was that was probably better informed than the American public was, and not sharing much information. So I think that we'll never know how many cases were prevented by shutting down schools, shutting down businesses, obviously we were able to keep those numbers very low because we didn't really have it, and nobody really knew just exactly how contagious or what instances were necessary in order for it to spread quickly. We know that now, and it's starting to hit home, but by this time, part of the problem with that, by this time we all have we're tired of it. And I think Dr. Anthony Fauci said just the other day, we have quarantine fatigue, essentially, and so people are doing things that they're getting in situations that cause it to spread in our rural communities. So I think hindsight is 2020. I think the governor took the precautions that she felt necessary. I think that she conferred with her team. So I don't think I would have changed that. So I think it was a decision that I think with the knowledge people had was one that was appropriate.
Okay. Now we're running a little short of time. So what I'm going to do is just jump over to allow you a little bit of time to speak here at the end. my first question would be, what in your position, from your viewpoint, what are the big differences between, you know, Roger Sims and Mark Samsel? And if you can, like I said, we have about less than 5 minutes, you know, in short story.
Yeah. Okay. Well, he's obviously more handsome and younger than I am.
I don't know about that.
The the difference, you know, what you basically have this election is a moderate Democrat running against a moderate to moderate Republican. But I think the thing about Mr. Samsel is, you know, he's a dedicated Republican. He wants to stay in favor with the party. So when the party when the party says we're going to do this, no matter how he feels about it, he's going to go ahead and go with the party. And for example, he voted to put the amendment abortion on the primary ballot. And of course, the trick to that was that the Republican leadership knew that in the primary, Republican, particularly the more conservative Republicans, are going to come out hard during the primary. They're going to approve this amendment. They were too afraid to put it on the general ballot this fall because they knew it would probably go down because the number of Kansans who believe in at least some access to abortion would have said no. And so I think that you know, he wants to stay in good graces with the Republicans. He's obviously he's been criticized by some of his former opponents. Renee Slinker called him a rhino, you know, and you know, I don't think so. You know, the legislature used to be consist of mostly moderate Republicans and Democrats, and yeah, there were differences between them, but they worked things out and moved Kansas forward. And it's sense that I think that from my perspective, the Democrats are still fairly moderate. They're common sense people. You know, we're not all you know, liberals who we know that that's not going to go over in Kansas, but we want to get things done. And whereas the Republican Party has made stances on issues like school funding and like abortion and Medicaid expansion that are consistent with people who are ideologues about keeping government small.
Okay. Well, we have about a minute, and Roger, I just want to thank you so much for, you know, doing this and allowing the folks in District 5 to get a chance to know you a little bit better, and here in my area, Anderson County. So I hope this works well for you, and I know it will help inform the voters a little more. Any last words? Or
Yeah, Mark, I'm going to take a couple, just a minute or two, and just talk very quickly. I mean, I know that you asked about the mask mandates and masks in schools, and I just want to touch on that very quickly. I recently talked to one of my former students who is a teacher now in Paola District, and she said that you know, they have a mask mandate there, and she said the kids wear the mask because they want to stay in school, and most of the cases of COVID that arise in the school have come from outside the school. So she felt like the masks were fairly effective. And I think that, you know, obviously the administrators are in a tough spot. You have parents saying, we don't want masks. Then you have the state saying you need to do masks. And probably they feel like we need to protect our kids. And so I think it's really important. And you asked very briefly about if herd immunity was an option, and I really don't think it is. Herd immunity is like kind of defined as like 60 to 70% have either been vaccinated or have had the coronavirus. And we don't even know right now if having coronavirus is further protection against getting it again. But there are 2.9 million people in Kansas. If we had a herd immunity, that would mean that something like 1.03 million people, about 2 million people would have had it. Of that, 101,000 would have been hospitalized and 20,300 would be dead. And so I don't really think, I think we need to do everything that we can. Imagine if we had, if we even had 50,000 people who needed hospitalization right now, we simply couldn't handle it. So we've got to fight with every tool we got. Right now, those only tools are basically masks, washing, staying away from people, and even staying home. So, I would hope that people in Anderson County has gone up. I think as of yesterday, they had 153 total cases, which is up from 69 a month ago. So that is basically more than doubled in the last month. And so my wish is that that citizens in Anderson County, and I've talked to some of them, and they are being careful, is that they need to take this seriously and take protections. Slap on a mask. Those of you who've done construction, you know how to you can live with a mask and saw boards and sand sheetrock. So anyway, thank you very much again for the opportunity, Mark.
All right, Roger, I appreciate it very much, and good luck come election time. Okay.
Okay.
All right. Stay healthy. All right. Bye-bye.